day 2 of the Ignite Growth Conference. We are excited to continue our discussion today under the theme Productivity in Action. We are thrilled to have you with us for another day of engaging discussions and valuable insights. Before we begin today's sessions, as yesterday's general housekeeping note, we kindly request all the members of the audience to ensure that your mobile phones are put to silent as to not disrupt all the speakers. We appreciate your cooperation and understanding. Before we begin today's sessions, we would like to take a moment to extend a heartfelt thanks to all our speakers. We deeply appreciate the time and effort you've devoted to sharing your invaluable insights with us. Your contributions are truly meaningful and greatly appreciated. Further, we would like to extend a sincere thanks to our sponsors for their generous support in making this two-day conference possible. Our banking partners, Hutton National Bank, Gold partners, Columbus Stock Exchange and Huawei, and our silver partners, Aitken Spence, Lanka IOC, and Mobitel. Your partnership is integral to the success of this event, and we are grateful for your involvement. For anyone also coming in, please don't feel shy. We have a few seats at the front, so please come forward and take a seat. As we are back and ready to go, we would like to kickstart today's sessions with fascinating discussions lined up on how platform-based companies are revolutionizing traditional business models and scaling at an unprecedented pace. Joining us virtually to lead this session is Mr. Sudaraka Ariyaratna, an economist with deep insights into the world of platform companies. He will explore how these companies are disrupting industries and transforming the global business landscape. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sudaraka Ariyaratna. A quick note, if you do want to access our presentations, we will be happy to share them with you on a Google Drive with our speakers' consent. This will be available in a couple of days. Mr. Sudaraka, over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person with you all, but I hope that my virtual presentation is helpful and that you all are able to learn something from it. So today I'll be talking about platform companies and how they have revolutionized business models and as a result have ignited growth across economies around the world. Firstly, to set up the stage for our conversation, I would like to basically discuss some of the jargon that I'll be using throughout this presentation, starting with economic interaction, which is the exchange of goods, services, and money between individuals in an economy, which is facilitated by what's called economic search, which describes how people search for and select goods and services in an economy. Because people have limited information, it usually takes time to find a good fit in a market. So you have to keep looking until you, as a consumer, find what you are looking for, looking to purchase, right? Which brings us to the idea of matching markets, which is a clearinghouse or a platform that basically matches the two parties of transaction. It can be a buyer or a seller, it can be a donor and a recipient, or it can even be human relationships. If you look at marriage, for instance, for a long time, economists have treated the marriage market as a matching market. It doesn't have to be confined to marriage. Think of friendships, think of all sorts of relationships that human beings form with each other, all of these would come under matching markets. What's special about matching markets compared to your regular commodity markets is that prices are not the sole determinants of good matches in this market, as the good or service that's being transacted here is not fully commoditized. So think of the labor market where you have an employer on one side and an employee on the other side. The employer doesn't just want the cheapest employee, the employer wants someone who is competent enough to be able to do the job. So there are a lot of preferences that the employee have to match to be recruited, right? On the side of the employee doesn't want to go and work for the person who pays them the highest salary. They also would be interested in things like work culture and other opportunities that the place of employment offers. So it doesn't just depend on price, it depends on a host of other factors, right? Think of the lodging industry, where if you want to go and stay a night at a particular place, you wouldn't necessarily go for the cheapest place because you would have a lot of preferences that that place has to meet for you to then book a night at that place. School admissions is a market where you don't have any prices at all. Think of public schools and how students are admitted to public schools in year one, where you have schools on one side and you have the students on the other side. And this is the sort of transaction where students are matched with schools by the education department or whichever government authority that handles the matching without prices getting involved in the process at all. Think of kidney exchanges. When it comes to kidney transplants, they are also, because governments around the world have outlawed the sale of kidneys, the exchanges happen without prices playing any role. Without prices playing any role. So participants on both sides must choose each other for transaction to occur in these markets where prices don't necessarily play the most crucial role. So the match being mutual is what's crucial in these markets. The key characteristics of these markets is that they are two-sided in nature. You have the side of the buyer, you have the side of the seller, you have the side of the donor, you have the side of the recipient, so on and so forth. And you also have the non-price mechanisms that play a huge role in these markets, compared with, say, the market for cabbage, where if you were to go and buy cabbage, you would simply go and buy the cabbage that was available for the cheapest price. But here it doesn't work that way. So there are a lot of non-price mechanisms that go into consideration. The preferences matter. So the preferences of the buyers and the sellers of both parties are the most important thing that would then lead to what's called a stable matching. A stable matching in matching markets is basically a situation where you're matched with another party, another participant in the market, and there are no two participants that would rather make a different match by breaking this match up. The necessity for a clearinghouse or a centralized platform in this kind of matching market arises because prices cannot do all the work in the market. So there's a lot of other factors that go into the decision-making process, like the preferences of the participants in the market. And because information is not readily available, the information asymmetry makes the transactions difficult. Again, think of the kidney exchange market. If I am in need of a kidney, I wouldn't necessarily know someone who's willing to donate a kidney that would also match my profile, which makes it very difficult to transact in this market. So a clearinghouse or a centralized platform would be able to basically match me with someone who is able to provide me with a kidney that would match my requirements, right? So thickness of the market matters in these cases because the more participants there are in the market, the easier it is to make a good and accurate match. So you will end up with more matches in a market that's considered thick or that has more participants in it. So there are two kinds of matching markets, like I alluded to before. You have matching markets where prices play some role. So you have actual demand and supply curves in operation in these markets. And the modern day manifestation of these markets in modern economies is the platform companies that are based on profit motives. And because we are in the internet age today, a lot of these platforms tend to take a digital form. And you also have matching markets where prices don't play any role at all. So there's no demand and supply curve, right? And these markets manifest in the form of clearinghouses that match participants based on their preference using an algorithm without any profit motive at all. And I'll get to that later. But first, I want to talk about platforms where there is some kind of role played by prices. So a platform is a clearinghouse, like I said earlier, that brings together the buyers and sellers of a good or service that is not fully commoditized, but involves some kind of price mechanism. In the internet age, most platforms take a digital form. So think of Amazon, think of eBay, think of Daraz. In the hospitality industry, think of Airbnb and Booking.com. And in the transport sector, think of Uber and QuickMe. So the study of how these digital platforms create value by connecting people, businesses, and resources is what's called platform economics in the discipline of economics. How do these platforms work? These platforms work by bringing together sellers and buyers, and in doing so, platforms reduce information asymmetry in markets that they serve. Think of hailing a tuk. In the time before Uber and PickMe, you would have had to basically walk to the three-wheeler stand at a junction and then see if there was a three-wheeler available. But with PickMe, from the comfort of your home, you can order a three-wheeler and it will come to you. So it basically takes away the information asymmetry of the availability of three-wheelers and so on and so forth. And think of booking a villa down south if you're going away on holiday for the weekend. Back in the day, if you had a house down south that you wanted to rent out to tourists, for instance, you'd have found it very difficult to do that because, say, for example, a tourist in Europe or Russia wouldn't know that your house existed that you were willing to rent out, right? But now with Booking.com and Airbnb, you can just list it on one of these platforms, and then they will be able to see it from wherever they are, and then they'll be able to look at pictures of what your house looks like, and if the house matches the specific preferences they have, they would be very happy to go ahead and place a booking on your rental property, right? So by bridging this information gap in the market, platforms basically reduce information asymmetry and therefore able to bring together buyers and sellers. The most important thing about platforms is what's called the network effect, which is the idea that with more users on either side of the transaction, the likelihood of a match increases substantially. So the more you have people willing to rent out villas, and the more you have people who are willing to basically give away their villas on rent, you're going to end up with more people having their preferences met through these platforms, which is basically going to attract even more people to these platforms. So you're going to have many transactions that take place. And another important aspect of these platforms is the reputation systems that are built into them, right? So for instance, an app like Booking.com or Airbnb would have reviews and ratings that are used as metrics of quality, which enhance the trust between the buyers and sellers. So again, back in the day, even if I had a villa in down south that I wanted to basically rent out to tourists, it would be very unlikely that tourists would be willing to rent it out because they wouldn't know what it looks like from wherever they are. They wouldn't be able to necessarily see a picture of the villa. So they would only be, say, willing to rent it out if they had met someone else who had stayed at the villa and gave a glowing recommendation of the villa, right? But right now, because you can basically upload pictures of your villa on Booking.com and then also have people who have stayed at the villa before basically leave reviews, it's very easy to basically filter out the bad places because all you have to do is read a couple of reviews and it'll tell you all you need to know about the place. And then based on that, you can make a judgment as to whether you would want to book that place or not. So the result of this network effect and these reputation systems are built into these platforms is that now we are able to basically proceed with transactions at reduced costs. These costs take both the form of transaction costs because you basically spend less time searching for things, right? Because everything is available really at your fingertips, and also actual costs because now because you have higher efficiency, in these markets, it automatically ends up resulting in lower cost to the consumers. And also you have higher sweating of assets that would have otherwise sat idling. For instance, your house in, I don't know, Matara that you wanted to rent out for the weekend. Back in the day, you'd have found it very difficult to rent it out. So it has sat idle for a long time without being occupied. But now, because of all of these platforms, you'd be able to easily rent it out for the weekend. So what actually enables these digital platforms, on one hand, is the technological innovations that have taken place in the last couple of decades that provided the underlying infrastructure, the tools, and the digital environment for users to interact, share information, and also to conduct transactions with each other on a single accessible space. And also, on the other hand, with the advent of the mobile phone and everyone having a mobile phone on their hands, and also with the internet prices coming down in the last decade or so, these platforms have been made accessible to a lot more users globally and have been made available at their fingertips, which has resulted in a huge network effect where more people have basically signed onto these platforms, leading to these network effects and increased value for these platforms because the platforms have now all of a sudden become very thick, leading to more and better matches. So the trust in these platforms have increased. Now let's look at what search means in the context of these platforms, right? So in general, internet search generates value through a variety of sources, and this is based on an article that was published by McKinsey some time ago, where they talked about how internet search leads to better matching, time saved, raising awareness, price transparency, long tail offerings by bringing in opportunities for niche sellers and buyers to transact, and problem solving, and also how internet search has led to new business models. Digital platforms have basically taken it to the next level. You can think of digital platforms as these value benefits of internet search on steroids because of how it has been able to basically enhance the value generated through these sources of value of internet search, right? So what actually are the benefits of these platforms to the economy? First of all, like I said earlier, it bridges the information gap in markets because platforms introduce buyers to sellers and sellers to buyers, and the reputation of the platform and the review and the rating systems for buyers and sellers enhance trust in the market. Someone is much more likely to be able to discern the quality of what the sellers are selling based on pictures and reviews and based on the reputation of the platform itself, right? And this convergence of information has led to lower transaction costs, including lower search costs. And what the result of that has been is that it has upended the importance of brands in our lives. Because in the absence of platforms, back in the day, like I said, if you wanted to rent out accommodation somewhere for a night, you would have basically relied on brand names, which was what filled the information gap back in the day, right? So think of the Hiltons and the Marriotts and the Sheratons of the world. Back in the day, you would have basically relied on these brand names to indicate good quality and a particular standard of quality to you. And because of that, you would have gone with these particular choices, right? But now, because you can actually discern the quality of all of these small places based on the reviews and the pictures that you see, you are much more likely to entertain the idea of staying at one of these places. So the world no longer runs on these brand names alone. Now there are opportunities for a lot of these small scale people to enter the market and basically be competitive in these industries in a way that was not available to them a lot some time back. And because of this, platforms have facilitated what's called the long tail in a lot of industries, right? The long tail is the array of niche goods and services with relatively low demand, which collectively make up a significant portion of the market, right? For instance, the rooms that are being put up for rent on Airbnb, and the small villas and boutiques, boutique hotels in the hospitality industry. All of these have been made possible through these platforms. And also when it comes to the tea industry of Sri Lanka, you can think of all of the niche teas that would not have been sold at the Colombo auction before, because the Colombo auction has a specific minimum quantity for something to be listed, for a batch of tea to be listed at the auction, right? But now if you have a producer that just produced, say, 10 kilograms of a very niche tea, you can always, put it on Amazon or one of these platforms and then find a buyer who probably resides in, say, Germany or Poland, right? All of these platforms have made it possible for these niche producers to find buyers in places around the world. So that is what basically the long tail impact of platforms have been. So what this has meant is that it has allowed for more granularity in the market, and therefore have created new markets that were not there before. The conventional markets, of course, marginalized this long tail because it was very difficult for these small producers to enter the markets because of the many barriers to their entry into the market. But platforms have remedied this through providing easy market entry to a lot of these small players, and also through algorithms that match niche sellers with niche buyers. It's no longer difficult for niche sellers to find people who are willing to buy the products that they're selling, because these matching algorithms have been developed in a way that it would introduce these niche sellers to the niche buyers, right? And also, platforms have led to lower costs and lower prices across the board. Platforms deliver lower prices to consumers through increased competition among sellers, because now we have, in addition to the traditional players, a lot of small sellers who have come into the market, which has basically enhanced competition in a lot of industries and therefore brought prices down. You also have a lot of economies of scale resulting from these platforms, because everyone shares a single infrastructure that is the platform. So the more sellers that come into the market, there is necessarily not a huge expansion in the fixed cost of these platforms, which has led to economies of scales over time. You have greater productivity because now there are fewer idle assets sitting at home. For instance, think of the three-wheeler industry of Sri Lanka, right? You have a lot of three-wheelers in Sri Lanka, which might shock some people to learn. They're actually used as family vehicles. But with the advent of platforms like Uber and PickMe, now these people, while basically using these three-wheelers for the family purposes that they've originally bought for, can now in their downtime basically run a few hires and earn an extra buck, right? So again, you have more sweating of the assets and less assets, sitting by idly, because of these platforms, which has led to greater productivity in the economy. You also have network effects. Like I said earlier, you have price transparency, because everyone can see what the prices are, which basically increases transparency in the market. And again, like I said, because of the lower transaction costs also, the prices have gone down across the board. Also think of the convenience factor that these platforms have introduced to our lives. Before the time of PickMe and Uber, you had to walk to a three-wheeler park and then negotiate fares with the drivers. You could only pay with cash, so you had to have the exact amount of cash, or the three-wheeler driver might say that they don't have the cash to give you the balance. You had to give the driver the directions, so God help you if you didn't know exactly where you were going. And then also you had a constant fear about safety, because once you were in three-wheeler, there was nothing that you could do if it turned out to be a dangerous driver, or other fears that you might have as a woman or a child traveling alone in three-wheeler, right? And also there was no recourse for consumer rights back in the day. But today, in the platform era, you can request it from the comfort of your home, and the fare is determined by the app based on demand and supply, so you don't necessarily have to haggle with the driver. You can make digital payments, which has made that also easier, right? The GPS takes care of the navigation. You no longer have to give the driver the directions. And there are a lot of assurances on safety that have been introduced by these platform companies. And you also have customer care at your fingertips in case anything goes wrong. So all of this has enhanced the experience of using these services compared to the time before these platforms. And these platforms also allow for congestion pricing. Think of surge pricing on PickMe or dynamic pricing in the lodging industry on Booking.com or Airbnb. So at times of high demand, the congestion pricing incentivizes more sellers to participate in the market and also encourages consumers at the low end of the demand curve to exit the market, and therefore balances out the demand and supply. So congestion pricing helps clear the market by allowing the free market to efficiently manage demand and supply. So these platforms have actually also helped the free market work better. So these platforms, like I said, use consumer data on preferences, which facilitates more accurate matches between buyers and sellers. And because of artificial intelligence, the companies are able to personalize user experience and analyze the data and then basically provide a very tailored, customized service to the consumers. And also AI has been used to basically do things like fraud detection and enhance security, which basically gives an overall better experience to the users. And there's also an aspect of self-regulation that's built into these platforms, right? Because their profitability hinges on the reputation of the platforms. So the quality control, safety tools, and the customer service are all built into these platforms, which makes matters easy for the government because now the government has less of a role to play in regulation, which again generates better outcomes for the consumer. Sri Lanka's down south is actually a good case study of how platforms work because the accommodation industry, the lodging industry, is a success story because of how booking platforms operate without a hindrance. So you can find a lot of small villas to basically rent on holiday, which has brought down prices and has basically also given opportunities for people living in these areas to earn an extra buck. But the ride-hailing industry rather stands as a foil on the other hand, because it is rife with inefficiencies, because platforms are actually not allowed to operate in a lot of these areas, because the three-wheeler mafias don't allow PickMe and Uber drivers to participate in these markets. So you have a situation where in one industry, you have a success story, in another industry, you have complete failure. So the challenge for the government is to figure out how to regulate the markets in a way that optimizes the ability for platform companies to operate. So some of the things that the government can do is to remove regulatory hindrances to the operation of digital platforms, to enhance public digital infrastructure to further enhance platforms. For instance, digital identity verification is important, and also introducing payment platforms for people to make payments digitally, which would basically encourage the use of these platforms more and more. And also the government needs to start thinking about the power of data and whether it's a force for good, because there are real privacy concerns involving a lot of the data that a lot of these companies are able to collect, right? But also at the same time, because of the amount of data that these companies have their hands on, including personal consumer data of the populations of these countries, the government also needs to develop infrastructure to utilize this kind of digital data in policy making, to identify what kind of data can be used for digital policy making, and then to kind of come up with a mechanism to safely exchange this data and then use that data in targeted policy making. So a company like, say, PickMe or Uber or Amazon would have a lot of consumer data that would be very helpful, for instance, in policy making if the governments figure out how to use the data right. Moving on to matching markets without a lot of without a price mechanism. In these markets, there is no price mechanism regulating activity, like I said earlier. Think of school admissions, think of kidney transplants. So in the absence of a market design and a clearinghouse, there would be a missing market. So think of the school admissions for grade 1 in Sri Lanka, where there is absolutely no method to the madness, and you have a lot of parents wanting their kids admitted to very specific schools, and these schools basically have become rackets for corruption because the government has failed to basically introduce a foolproof system to match students with schools. Think of kidney transfers in Sri Lanka, where you don't again have systems. So people who need kidneys have to basically advertise on Facebook and other platforms to basically find matching donors, right? So if the government can actually also think about introducing platforms or clearinghouses to match these two different kinds of participants in these markets in a way that makes sense, then we will have much more efficient outcomes in this country, and it would ignite growth for sure. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sudaraka, for this very insightful presentation.